I did discover some writings that I really loved, even though they were in a tradition that wasn't my tradition, which was the Christian tradition. And that's a teacher named Bernadette Roberts. And she wrote some books called No Self, What is Self, all these self books. I think she wrote 3. And she gives a diagram of this disappearing self-sense. And she describes it in a really lovely way. And by the way, she passed in fall of 2017 in her 80s. And so she actually mapped out this from separate self to unity and beyond to no self, which she called no self. Those are just made up terms. So what she described and I kind of make things my own. So if anyone really knows about this teacher or goes and researches it, they might have a different understanding of it. But this is my understanding of her diagram. And she did this diagram of a donut. So at first, the donut hole in the center is filled with separate self. Some people may call it ego sense, right? And we can't imagine anything other, right? And for those who can imagine something other, who long for the end of separation, right? A little hole appears right in the center of this filled-in spot in the center of the donut, and that's the divine. That's the divine that's starting to call back its own nature home. It's like a little plug in the bathtub. You take it out and it starts to drain, right? And so this little hole, it starts to widen so that you have more and more of an open center in the middle of this donut. And what that open center is, it's the absence of self. It's the unborn nature where we all come from. It's drawing back its imagined self back into where it came from, which is not imagined, where all imagination comes from, right? So this whole, it starts to expand as the periphery, which is the separate self, the periphery of the donut, let's say, that's the self-sense that's remaining. So this hole in the donut, it's starting to grow. The more and more that we become accustomed and used to the disappearance of our own self-nature. Sometimes it happens in chunks. Sometimes it happens very incrementally, like the sea taking the sand back from a little island, bit by bit. Sometimes it kind of a whole chunk, like in Antarctica or something, where the iceberg just collapses into the sea, and you can feel this, shift in consciousness, and like, oh, I just lost a big chunk of myself. And sometimes people get a little afraid, And during this time, I really do feel like it is really helpful to have a guide or a couple guides to help you, to help make sense of it, to help bring kind of calmness to the mind. Because the mind, at times, it can be really in for the ride and enjoying it, and other times it can get a little freaked out. That's my experience working with people. So it's really helpful to have someone who's further along in the journey to be able to say, this is completely natural, what's happening. This is just the evolution of your own being. It's returning home. First it bursts itself and becomes something, and it goes on a return journey back to unbecoming. It's like a circle. It comes like a rocket. It goes up. What goes up must come down. So it comes back down, and it's in a return phase. And I would say that most of the seekers who are really hungry for feeling their wholeness, that's the call of the unborn, or the unmanifested calling you back, the divine calling you back home. So the more we get adjusted to this, the more the center of the donut expands, and it's slowly taking more and more space up. So the hole in the donut's growing, and the periphery around it is thinning out. right? Until so I'm trying to remember. I think when the center of it has been really seen through as being empty, that is the first realization. That's a realization that is very, very important, that the separate self isn't real, that the person that we think we are is an imagined entity. Even though we might still not have that full understanding, we might not know how to live that, but still that primary self-referential center has fallen out. So when the mind looks at itself, it goes to nothing. It goes to an empty center. There's nothing there it can reflect on. It falls into this hole. And that's the divine. It falls back into divine. And even though the separate self can still be doing its thing, every time it looks for itself, it falls into the center, into this big hole, right? So more that it gets adapted, the more that we get used to this, we get the hang of it, it grows until it hits the periphery edge of this so-called donut, the very edge. When it's that far out, it's already starting to experience wholeness and the experience of unity consciousness. And it's, for all intensive purposes, it's realized that being is now living, for the most part, as the whole, knowing itself more. It's an increasing understanding, something that increases. But then it hits its own edge, right? We still have the edge of the donut. It's like a bubble. The bubble inside is empty, and the outside of the bubble has some skin. It has something there that is lying between itself and this outside. So there's still some difference there between inside and outside. But it doesn't feel like it. But there still is this thin little veil. And that is what I call coming to the end of unity consciousness. So you might not know that there is still this thin little skin, this thin veil lying between you and that, because it doesn't feel like it. It just feels you feel one with everything. And like I said earlier, you don't know something until it falls away. You often don't know. How could you know what lies ahead? And actually, it's not been spoken about much. So that's what I was talking about earlier, how I was living an increasing experience of the self-center disappearing, swallowing itself up, until it just reached its own edge. And then something came in and just went pop, right? And then whatever was experiencing oneness, even though it was pretty thinned out, whatever experiences oneness is gone. So this bubble popping, yeah, it's really hard to talk about. It's when self-reflection falls away, what is able to talk about something? Right? Life becomes pure experiencing now and now and now and now, without carrying the past, without looking in the future even. It's just now, 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 now. And if it is looking in the past, it's looking now. And if it's looking in the future, it's doing it now. All the past and future exists now anyway.